The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of corporate missive that arrives precisely when your spirit is already hanging by gossamer threads. The subject line read, Mental Health Initiative Proposal Denied. I stared at those capital letters until they burned into my retinas like a brand. Denied. The scent of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner filled my nostrils as I sat in my cramped cubicle, surrounded by the beige walls that had witnessed 3 years of my life slowly draining away. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the message from the board of directors, each word a calculated dismissal of months of research, documentation, and hope. Dear Miss Chen, it began with the kind of false politeness that precedes a knife to the back. After careful consideration, the board has determined that your proposal for mandatory mental health days lacks sufficient business justification. We trust you understand that Meridian Industries must prioritize shareholder value and operational efficiency above all else. Above all else, even above the mental health of the people who built their empire with their blood, sweat, and slowly deteriorating sanity. I read the rest through a haze of familiar numbness, the same feeling I'd carried since my breakdown 6 months ago, when I'd spent 43 hours straight in this office finishing the Hartwell merger documents while surviving on energy drinks and sheer desperation. The same numbness I'd felt when I watched my colleague Marcus collapse from exhaustion during the quarterly review, when Sarah from accounting started having panic attacks in the supply closet, when we lost Jennifer to suicide last spring and they replaced her desk before her memorial service was even over. The rejection wasn't just a no. It was a manifesto of indifference wrapped in corporate speak. They cited budget constraints while simultaneously approving a 7-figure bonus package for CEO Richard Blackwood. They mentioned maintaining competitive edge while forcing employees to work 100-hour weeks that left us as hollow shells of human beings. But what struck me most was the final paragraph, the one that would haunt them forever. We suggest that employees struggling with mental health concerns seek private solutions rather than expecting corporate accommodation. Meridian Industries is not a healthcare provider. Private solutions, as if depression was something you could fix with a gym membership and positive thinking. I saved the email to a folder I'd been building for months, a digital arsenal of documentation, correspondence, and evidence that I'd originally intended for HR complaints that never went anywhere. But now, staring at this rejection, something cold and crystalline formed in the center of my chest. Something that felt like purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from my therapist, Dr. Martinez. Remember, Elena, your voice matters. You have the power to create change. Your voice matters. That's when the idea first whispered itself into existence, soft as silk but sharp as a blade. I'd spent 3 years watching this company slowly murder its employees' souls while congratulating itself on quarterly profits. I'd documented every policy violation, every OSHA breach, every instance of harassment swept under the rug. I'd seen the real cost of their operational efficiency, and I had the receipts. The TED Talk application deadline was in 6 weeks. I closed my laptop with the kind of deliberate calm that comes before a storm. Around me, my coworkers continued their zombie shuffle through another 14-hour day, unaware that everything was about to change. The fluorescent lights hummed their soulless tune, and somewhere in the executive suite, Richard Blackwood was probably laughing about something while employees 3 floors below contemplated jumping from the roof. Not anymore. I gathered my things slowly, savoring each mundane action as if it were a ritual. The click of my pen retracting, the whisper of paper sliding into my briefcase, the soft thud of my coffee mug, a gift from my mother that read "World's Best Daughter," settling into my bag. These small sounds became a symphony of transformation, marking the end of Elena Chen, the victim, and the birth of Elena Chen, the architect of justice. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like a descent into my own personal underworld, but I was no longer Persephone being dragged into darkness. I was Hades himself, and I was going home to plan the end of their world. That night, I spread every piece of evidence across my dining room table like a war council planning a siege. Financial reports showing the disparity between executive compensation and employee benefits. Emails dismissing safety concerns. Incident reports that had been mysteriously lost in HR. photos of the memorial wall where we hung pictures of colleagues who hadn't survived the corporate meat grinder. The amber glow of my desk lamp cast long shadows across the documents, and I felt like an archaeologist uncovering the bones of a civilization built on suffering. Every page told a story of systematic neglect, of human beings reduced to profit margins and quarterly projections. My laptop screen glowed as I began crafting my TED Talk proposal. The title came to me like a revelation: The Hidden Cost of Corporate Success: Why Employee Mental Health is Everyone's Business. Why employee mental health is everyone's business. Because when Jennifer threw herself from her apartment balcony, it became everyone's business. When Marcus had his heart attack at 32, it became everyone's business. When Sarah started cutting herself in the bathroom during lunch breaks, it became everyone's business. But they'd made it clear they didn't see it that way. I wrote until dawn, fueled by 3 years of suppressed rage and a clarity I hadn't felt since before my breakdown. The proposal detailed not just the problem, but the solution, and more importantly, the consequences of inaction. I included statistics about corporate liability, productivity losses, and the growing legal precedent for holding companies accountable for employee mental health. But the real power of my proposal lay in its personal narrative. I told Jennifer's story, Marcus's story, Sarah's story, my story. I painted a picture of a company that had forgotten the humanity of its workforce and was about to pay the price. When I submitted the application at 5:23 a.m., my hands were steady as surgeons' instruments. This wasn't about revenge, this was about justice. This was about speaking for every employee who'd ever been told their mental health was a private solution while their labor built someone else's empire. The next day, I walked into Meridian Industries with a secret burning in my chest like a coal. Every condescending smile from management, every dismissive comment about work-life balance, every casual mention of the necessity of our 100-hour weeks only fed the fire. "Elena," Richard Blackwood called out as I passed the executive suite, "I trust you've processed our decision regarding your proposal." His voice dripped with the kind of paternalistic concern that made my skin crawl. He stood in his corner office doorway, all 6 feet of entitled privilege, wrapped in a $3,000 suit, his silver hair perfectly styled and his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I have," I replied, my voice steady as granite. "I'm exploring alternative avenues for advocacy." "Alternative avenues?" His laugh was the sound of privilege dismissing inconvenience. "Elena, I admire your passion, but you need to understand that business decisions require business solutions. Perhaps you should focus that energy on your actual job performance. Perhaps you should focus on your actual job performance." The words hung in the air like a threat wrapped in corporate speak. But instead of shrinking, I felt that coal in my chest expand into something magnificent and terrible. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood, I'm very focused on performance these days." He nodded, satisfied that he'd put me in my place, and retreated into his office. Through the glass wall, I watched him settle into his leather chair. Italian leather, I'd noted from the invoice I'd processed last month. The same month we'd been told there was no budget for ergonomic keyboards to prevent repetitive stress injuries. 3 weeks later, the email arrived. "Congratulations! Your proposal, The Hidden Cost of Corporate Success, has been selected for TED Talk presentation. We're excited to provide a platform for this important conversation." I read the message 17 times, savoring each word like vintage wine. Around me, the office continued its death march toward another impossible deadline, but I felt suspended in a bubble of crystalline purpose. They'd given me the stage. They'd handed me the microphone. They'd provided the platform for their own destruction. That afternoon, I started my research in earnest. Not just about mental health statistics and corporate responsibility. I dug into Meridian Industries' financial records with the dedication of a forensic accountant. I traced money flows, bonus structures, and expenditures with surgical precision. I mapped the paper trail that showed exactly where their priorities lay. 7-figure executive bonuses while denying basic mental health coverage. Luxury corporate retreats while employees worked through holidays. A private jet for the board while cutting the employee assistance program. Every hypocritical expenditure became ammunition for my arsenal. But the real treasure was buried in the email archives. years of correspondence between board members, discussing employees like livestock and mental health concerns like inconvenient weather patterns. Messages that revealed the callous calculation behind every policy decision, every denial, every casual dismissal of human suffering. These people need to understand that work requires sacrifice, read one email from board member Patricia Hawthorne. If they can't handle the pressure, they should find employment elsewhere. Mental health days are just an excuse for laziness, wrote CFO David Morrison. We're not running a spa. The suicide was unfortunate, came from Blackwood himself, but we can't let isolated incidents drive policy decisions. Isolated incidents. Jennifer wasn't an incident. She was a person. A person who'd worked 90-hour weeks for 6 months straight because they'd fired her entire team and expected her to do the work of 4 people. A person who'd begged for help and been told to manage her time better. As I compiled this evidence, something fascinating happened. My rage crystallized into something purer and more dangerous: calculation. Every slight, every dismissal, every casual act of corporate cruelty became data points in an equation that would equal their downfall. I began practicing my speech in front of my bathroom mirror, watching my reflection transform from the broken woman who'd been denied a basic accommodation to someone harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. My voice gained strength with each rehearsal, moving from the trembling whisper of victimhood to the clear, cutting tone of judgment. Good evening, I would begin, my reflection staring back with eyes like winter stars. My name is Elena Chen, and I'm here to tell you about the hidden cost of corporate success. The cost measured not in dollars and cents, but in human lives. The words felt like weapons being forged in the fire of my determination. 2 weeks before the TED Talk, something beautiful happened. I received an email that made me smile for the first time in months. A real smile. Not the corporate grimace I'd been wearing like a mask. Dear Miss Chen, it read, we understand you'll be speaking at TED next week. Several board members and executives from Meridian Industries have requested tickets to attend your presentation. We're honored that your colleagues want to support your advocacy work. Support my advocacy work. They thought they were coming to watch their employee give a nice little speech about mental health awareness. They thought they were demonstrating corporate support for important causes. They thought they were safe. They had no idea they were buying tickets to their own execution. I crafted my response with the care of a poet. I'm honored that the Meridian leadership team wants to attend. I promise it will be an unforgettable presentation. Unforgettable. Such a delicious word, full of promise and prophecy. The night before the talk, I laid out my outfit with ritualistic precision. A black suit, armor for battle. Pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, a woman who'd fought her own wars in a time when women had even fewer weapons. Red lipstick, the color of fresh blood. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a predator dressed as prey, a wolf in executive clothing. My phone rang, Dr. Martinez. Elena, I wanted to check in before tomorrow. How are you feeling? Powerful, I said, and meant it. Remember, the goal is healing and positive change, not revenge. Not revenge. But justice and revenge were often the same thing, weren't they? When the system failed, when institutions protected profits over people, when corporate boards treated human suffering as acceptable collateral damage, sometimes justice required the complete destruction of that system. I remember, I lied smoothly. I'm going to change things. I'm proud of you, she said. Your voice matters. Your voice matters. Tomorrow, they would learn exactly how much. The TED Auditorium buzzed with the kind of energy that accompanies anticipated greatness. Red velvet seats arranged in perfect rows, stage lights that could transform anyone into a prophet or a pariah, and cameras that would broadcast this moment to millions of people around the world. I stood backstage, feeling the weight of 3 years of documentation in my briefcase, the memory of Jennifer's funeral in my heart, and the promise of justice burning in my veins. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see them, Blackwood, Hawthorne, Morrison, and the rest of the Meridian board sitting in the front row like kings at a gladiator match, expecting entertainment. They had no idea they were about to become the entertainment. Miss Chen? The stage manager appeared beside me, her headset crackling with technical chatter. You're on in 60 seconds. I nodded, smoothing my jacket one final time. In my mind, I could hear the click of my heels against the stage floor, the rustle of papers in my hands, the collective intake of breath when the audience realized what they were witnessing. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice, "please welcome Elena Chen." The stage lights were blinding at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see the sea of faces before me. Executives, academics, students, journalists, all waiting to hear what I had to say about corporate responsibility and mental health. In the front row, Blackwood leaned back in his seat with the satisfied smile of a man who believed he controlled the narrative. He was about to learn how wrong he was. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's perfect acoustics. "My name is Elena Chen, and I'm here to tell you about the hidden cost of corporate success. The cost that's measured not in dollars and cents, but in human lives." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the audience like snow. 6 months ago, I had what we politely call a breakdown. I'd been working 100-hour weeks for 3 years, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline, watching my colleagues drop around me like casualties in an undeclared war. When I finally collapsed, my company's response was clear. This was my personal failure, my inability to manage stress, my problem to solve privately. Murmurs rippled through the audience. In the front row, I saw Blackwood's smile falter slightly. So I tried to solve it. I researched best practices for corporate mental health. I documented the correlation between employee wellness and productivity. I crafted a careful, conservative proposal for voluntary mental health days. Not mandatory time off, not expensive therapy programs. Just the option for employees to take unpaid leave when their mental health required it. The stage lights were hot against my skin, but I felt cold and sharp as winter steel. My proposal was rejected, not because it lacked merit, not because it was financially impossible, but because, and I quote from the board's response, "Employees struggling with mental health concerns should seek private solutions rather than expecting corporate accommodation." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers. The financial reports I'd compiled showing executive compensation versus employee benefits. "Private solutions," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "This from a company that spent $12 million on executive bonuses last year while cutting mental health benefits. A company that maintains a fleet of private jets while telling employees that ergonomic keyboards are budget prohibitive." The murmurs were getting louder. I could see Blackwood leaning forward now, his face flushed with what might have been anger or embarrassment. "But let me tell you about the real cost of those private solutions." I clicked to my first slide, a photograph of Jennifer's desk, decorated with the small plants she'd loved and the family photos that survived her. This is Jennifer Walsh's desk. Jennifer was a project manager who worked 90-hour weeks for 6 months when the company decided to optimize efficiency by firing her entire team and expecting her to handle 4 people's workload. When she asked for help, she was told to manage her time better. When she mentioned feeling overwhelmed, she was reminded that peak performance requires sacrifice. When she killed herself last spring, they cleaned out her desk before her memorial service. The auditorium was completely silent now. I could feel the weight of 1,000 people holding their breath. Jennifer sought a private solution. It was very private indeed. I clicked to the next slide. Hospital records, anonymized but devastating in their clinical documentation of stress-related illnesses. Marcus Rodriguez, heart attack at 32. Sarah Kim, self-harm incidents requiring 3 emergency room visits. David Thompson, complete nervous breakdown resulting in a 6-month leave of absence that the company fought to deny. Each name was a nail in their coffin, each story a weight added to the scales of justice. These are the hidden costs of corporate success, the human beings who are sacrificed on the altar of quarterly profits, the employees who become acceptable casualties in the war for market dominance. I paused, looking directly at Blackwood, watching his face pale as he realized where this was heading. But perhaps you're thinking, Elena, these are tragic individual cases. Surely no company would systematically ignore employee mental health. Let me share some internal communications that suggest otherwise. The next slide contained email excerpts, carefully legal, meticulously sourced, and absolutely damning. These people need to understand that work requires sacrifice. If they can't handle the pressure, they should find employment elsewhere. This from a board member discussing employee stress complaints. Hawthorne's face had gone white as paper. Mental health days are just an excuse for laziness. We're not running a spa. This from the CFO in response to a proposal for voluntary wellness programs. Morrison was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. And my personal favorite, the suicide was unfortunate, but we can't let isolated incidents drive policy decisions. This from the CEO discussing Jennifer's death. The collective gasp from the audience was audible. I could see journalists frantically taking notes, cameras focusing on the Meridian executives who were beginning to look like defendants at their own trial. Isolated incidents, I repeated, my voice rising with controlled fury. That's what they called Jennifer's death. An isolated incident, a statistical anomaly, a private solution taken to its logical conclusion. I clicked to my final slide, a graph showing the correlation between corporate mental health policies and employee productivity, retention, and innovation. But here's what they missed in their calculations. Companies that prioritize employee mental health see 40% higher productivity, 60% lower turnover, and significantly higher innovation rates. They're not just morally bankrupt, they're strategically incompetent. The audience was with me now. I could feel it. The energy in the room had shifted from polite attention to righteous anger, from passive listening to active engagement with the injustice I was documenting. The hidden cost of corporate success isn't just human suffering, it's human potential. Every employee driven to breakdown is an idea that never gets developed. Every person who quits due to stress is expertise walking out the door. Every suicide is not just a personal tragedy, it's a failure of leadership that ripples through every level of an organization. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, making my final move. So what's the solution? How do we solve a problem that costs companies billions in lost productivity while destroying countless lives? I paused, savoring this moment. First, we hold leadership accountable. Not just legally, but professionally and personally. Board members who systematically ignore employee welfare should face consequences that match the magnitude of their negligence. I could see Blackwood reaching for his phone, probably texting his lawyers or PR team. Too late. Second, we make employee mental health a fiduciary responsibility. If boards have a legal obligation to maximize shareholder value, they should also have an obligation to protect the human assets that create that value. The audience was applauding now, some people standing. The energy was electric, dangerous, transformative. And third, we stop accepting private solutions to systemic problems. Mental health is not a personal failure. It's a public health issue that requires public accountability. I gathered my papers, looking one final time at the Meridian executives who were now surrounded by journalists and looking like they wanted to disappear into their seats. My name is Elena Chen. 6 months ago, I was told to find a private solution to my mental health struggles. Today, I'm offering a very public solution to theirs. The standing ovation was thunderous, sustained, and absolutely devastating. I could see Blackwood and his board being approached by reporters, their faces a mixture of rage and panic as they realized their carefully controlled narrative had just been obliterated on live television. As I walked off stage, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of silence, of complicity, of accepting the unacceptable, all of it lifted away like chains being unlocked. Behind me, I could hear the chaos beginning as journalists surrounded the Meridian executives, like sharks sensing blood in the water. My phone was already buzzing with messages. Interview requests, job offers, congratulations from colleagues who'd watched the live stream. But the text that made me smile was from Dr. Martinez. Your voice mattered. I'm proud of you. Your voice mattered. It had mattered enough to end careers, topple leadership, and maybe, just maybe, save some lives. The fallout was swift and comprehensive, like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Within 6 hours of my TED Talk going live, it had been viewed 2 million times. Within 12 hours, #Meridian Mental Health was trending on every social media platform. Within 24 hours, 3 major news networks had contacted me for interviews. But the real satisfaction came from watching the corporate machine that had ground so many people to dust finally face consequences for its actions. Blackwood's resignation came first, delivered through a terse press release at 3 a.m. on Thursday that cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. The press release was corporate speak for, "We're throwing him overboard before he takes the whole ship down with him." Hawthorne followed 6 hours later, her lawyer releasing a statement about unforeseen health issues that required her immediate retirement. Morrison lasted until Friday afternoon before announcing his departure to spend more time with family, a delicious irony considering his documented hostility toward work-life balance. By the end of the week, half the board had resigned and the company's stock had dropped 30%. The other half were fighting to distance themselves from the policies I'd exposed, suddenly discovering deep concerns about employee welfare that had apparently escaped their attention for decades. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, surrounded by flower arrangements from supporters and interview requests from journalists who wanted to hear more about corporate accountability and mental health advocacy. The same dining room table where I'd planned their destruction now held offers from consulting firms, speaking agencies, and corporations who wanted to hire me to audit their own employee wellness programs. The irony was delicious. I'd gone from being an ignored employee whose mental health concerns were dismissed as private problems to being a sought-after expert whose opinion on corporate culture was suddenly invaluable, but the real vindication came in smaller moments. Sarah from accounting sent me a message. "I watched your talk 17 times. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like someone understands." Marcus called to tell me he'd been contacted by lawyers about a class action lawsuit against Meridian for workplace conditions. Even Jennifer's mother reached out, thanking me for honoring her daughter's memory and fighting for changes that might prevent other families from experiencing their loss. The new interim CEO at Meridian, a woman named Catherine Reyes, who'd built her reputation on progressive HR policies, announced a comprehensive mental health initiative within her first week. Paid mental health days, on-site counseling services, stress management workshops, and a complete revision of the company's performance management system to prioritize sustainable productivity over exploitation. It was everything I'd originally asked for and more. 2 weeks after the talk, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Martinez knocked on my door carrying coffee and wearing the kind of smile that suggested professional pride mixed with personal satisfaction. "Elena," she said, settling into my living room chair. "I wanted to check in. How are you processing everything?" I considered the question seriously. How was I processing the complete transformation of my life, the destruction of my former employers, and the sudden platform I'd gained to advocate for systemic change? Honestly, I feel free. I traced the rim of my coffee mug, watching steam rise like incense. For 3 years, I carried the weight of that place, the injustice, the suffering, the feeling that nothing would ever change. Now that weight belongs to them. And the revenge aspect? How do you feel about the role you played in their downfall? Revenge. Such a loaded word, carrying implications of pettiness and personal vendetta. But what I'd done wasn't revenge. It was accountability. It was justice delivered through truth-telling and public scrutiny. I gave them exactly what they gave me, I said finally. A public platform to discuss their performance and their choices. The only difference is that their performance couldn't withstand scrutiny. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. And now, what comes next? What came next was already taking shape around me. Speaking engagements at universities and conferences. Consulting contracts with companies that wanted to avoid becoming the next Meridian Industries. A book deal to expand on the themes I'd addressed in my talk. A nonprofit foundation focused on workplace mental health advocacy. But more than that, what came next was the knowledge that I'd found my voice. Not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been told their suffering was a private solution to systemic problems. Change, I said, and meant it. Real, structural, meaningful change. 3 months after the TED Talk, I stood in the lobby of Morrison & Associates, the consulting firm that had offered me a position as director of corporate wellness strategy. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air carried the scent of fresh flowers and success. It was the kind of environment where I belonged now, not as someone seeking accommodation for basic human needs, but as someone whose expertise in those needs was considered invaluable. My reflection in the lobby windows showed a different woman than the one who'd submitted that original mental health proposal. Same face, same professional attire, but something fundamental had shifted. My posture spoke of confidence rather than desperation. My expression carried authority rather than pleading. I was no longer Elena Chen the victim, begging for scraps of consideration from corporate overlords. I was Elena Chen, the architect of change, the voice that had brought down a toxic system and built something better in its place. As I walked toward the elevator that would take me to my corner office, yes, corner office, with windows and natural light and a door that closed when I needed space to think, I felt the weight of a choice well made. They'd rejected my petition for mental health days, thinking they were dismissing an inconvenient employee with inconvenient needs. Instead, they'd created a force for transformation that would ripple through corporate culture for years to come. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, carrying the memory of Jennifer's smile, the satisfaction of justice served, and the promise of a future where no employee would have to choose between their mental health and their livelihood. The hidden cost of corporate success had finally come due, and they'd paid it in full. My reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors smiled back at me, sharp, satisfied, and infinitely dangerous to anyone who thought human suffering was an acceptable price for quarterly profits. I'd found my voice, and they would never silence it again.